after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, the Conservatives are calling for the Chancellor to apologise after revealing further details of a U-turn on winter fuel payments. 9 million pensioners in England and Wales will receive the allowance this year. Anyone with an annual income of under £35,000 will be eligible. Treasury Minister James Murray has told LBC they believe that's the right threshold.
£35,000 is broadly in line with average earnings, and it means that over three quarters of pensioners will receive the winter fuel payment this year. And I think most people would see that as being a sensible way of approaching.
A plastic surgeon who tried to kill a fellow doctor because he wanted him out of the way has been jailed for at least 22 years. 61-year-old Peter Brooks stabbed Graham Parks after trying to set fire to his house. The UN Special Rapporteur on occupied Palestinian territories has called for the UK to intervene after Israeli forces intercepted a small aid boat. Environmentalist Greta Thunberg is among those on board a British-flagged vessel headed to Gaza. And the author of The Day of the Jackal, Frederick Forsyth, has died at the age of 86 after a brief illness. His literary agents say he was surrounded by his family and died at home this morning. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 5 points at 88.32. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather: rain becoming confined to central, northern England and Wales tonight, becoming drier in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. If you're going to make a U-turn, do it properly. If you're going to own up to a mistake, own it. If you're going to eat humble pie, then pour on a good dollop of grovel sauce while you're at it. When Keir Starmer announced last month, after Labour had taken a battering in the local elections, that he was thinking again about the removal of the winter fuel payment to millions of pensioners, everybody was a little suspicious. How many would actually get the money back? And when? In time for this winter? Well, today, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves filled in some key details. And this is indeed a proper U-turn. More than 3/4 of pensioners, that's everyone with an income of below £35,000 a year, more than 8 million people, will now get the payment this winter. That will cost the Treasury well over £1 billion, and we don't know yet where the money's coming from. Reform and the Tories are claiming this is a victory for them, and you can see why. But the real victors are the voters who told Labour what they thought of it in no uncertain terms. This is a victory for democracy, but it should also draw a line under the single biggest policy mistake made by Labour since the election. It allows Reeves now to focus for the rest of this week on the big investment ahead in the spending review. More for nuclear power, creating thousands of new jobs. More for tech, railways, policing and the NHS. It's one of the most important weeks for the new but unpopular government. Up to now, Starmer and friends have been widely criticised for being stingy, unimaginative and lacking in vision. So the biggest question is whether this longer-term investment and industrial strategy version of Labour hangs together, is noticed by voters and can fend off the rising reform rebellion led by Nigel Farage. Let's start today by talking to somebody regarded in Whitehall as one of the wisest heads around, a man interested in both the numbers and the morality behind the numbers, who advised previous governments on levelling up and economic policy, the former chief economist to the Bank of England, Andy Haldane.
I think, given the amounts of money involved, which were never all that big, $1.5 billion, give or take, a shuffling of the design of it will not be something that will cause our friends in the bonds market sleepless nights, I don't think. In some ways, the bigger question it begs is what took so long. There was a way of preserving the principle but tweaking the design. It would have avoided all the political pain. In terms of money amounts, this feels like, in the grand scheme of things, Andrew, small change.
Small change. Now, the Chancellor says that she can afford to do it. We don't know where the money is coming from exactly, but she can afford to do it because there are the first signs the economy is really turning around. The growth numbers for the first quarter were a little bit better than other G7 countries, and she feels the beginning of something shifting here. Do you think this is just rank optimism, or is there something in it?
Well, I think it's pretty much a year to the day when the previous government was also bragging about having the highest growth rate in the G7 off the back of a pretty good Q1 number. Too early to be declaring victory, that's for sure. Do I think there's a chance, Andrew, that growth this year will overperform where economists forecast currently are? Yes, I think there probably is. We do have, as the government's very fond of telling us, pay packets adjusted for inflation now going up. And there's no cast iron laws in economics, but a pretty good one is if real pay packets are going up, real spending is going up, and that appears now to be happening. On top of which, of course, as the cost of living has come down, the cost of borrowing has come down, with furthermore to come, I would say. That makes me think it won't be a year of chocks away growth, but that it could be a number well north of the 1% that most forecasts are around currently.
Well, I and a lot of other people would take that very, very happily indeed. You mentioned the cost of borrowing just now, and that's one of the great pressures on Rachel Reeves. She's basically saying, look, I can't really tax more overall. We've made these promises. We're already very highly taxed as a country, and I for sure can't borrow more because after Liz Truss, the bond markets are kind of staring at us with a sceptical, quizzical expression on their faces, as it were, and we are in a particularly difficult position. Is she right about that?
Well, I think both propositions, both about tax and about borrowing, are at least questionable. By international comparison, we're not an especially high tax economy. When it comes to borrowing, yes, we were borrowing quite a bit. Yes, the cost of that borrowing is higher than it was a few years ago. But ultimately, what bond markets care about is economies that are growing. It's the growth that pays back the debt in the future. And ultimately, you tell a story, Andrew, now about borrowing that is underpinning a growth strategy. I think bond markets take that in their stride.
Well, again, that's mildly encouraging. Let's just look at the growth strategy, which is, as you have argued for a long time yourself, Andy, basically an industrial strategy is what we've lacked in this country. I'm wondering whether you think that what we're going to see this week, and there's been lots of trails about extra money for AI, extra money for transport infrastructure, extra money for the health service, and so on, is the beginnings of a real industrial strategy for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the single best thing that the government economically has done so far is that the last budget, actually, much maligned the budget, but the really good bit was the more than £100 billion of extra capital expenditure.
And that's what we're going to see now, really.
That's what will be put to work. We saw some of it last week with the transport announcements. We'll see more of this week with the spending review and probably at the time the infrastructure review. It's certainly true that if you are to pursue a strategy, industrial or otherwise, it has to be at scale. And those are decent amounts of money. £100 billion is not small change. Equally, just being an economist, cautionary note, the actual gap we have to bridge is more like £2 trillion in terms of next.
Oh,
so
dear.
That's a 20th.
Oh, dear.
So yes,
it's
better.
Small steps in the right direction, but not giant strides. So there's the nuclear side. The other big announcement today has been, and I think this week generally, is going to be around AI. We've had a guy called Jensen Huang who runs NVIDIA, which is the world's largest chip company, in town, and he says that actually the UK is in a kind of Goldilocks position when it comes to AI. We have got lots and lots and lots of really clever people, the people we need. We have got a lot of money available for it from the private sector. And the one thing that we don't have, the weird thing we don't have, is enough infrastructure for AI. Can you explain what he means and what we should be doing in response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that would include data centres to support it. It would be cheap enough energy. Of course, these are huge consumers of energy. If that is expensive, it's a competitive disadvantage. It's also those skills, Andrew. We have significant skills deficits. Yes, we do the top end of AI well, but all the accompanying infrastructure requires skills, building things that we are in short supply. So is it a real opportunity? Yes. Should it be invested in at scale? Yes. The problem historically has not been the innovation end, it's been the scale-up end. And that will require injections of money, including from government.
We have a huge number of small pension companies in this country. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's thousands and thousands of them, with sometimes only 10 members of the pension fund paying in. And other countries like Australia have a much smaller number of giant pension funds. Can you explain to people listening why that matters, why that's a problem for us?
Well, we have a prospectively enormous pool of pension fund capital, £6 trillion of money, very little of which currently finds its way into investing in British business. Some of that is simple caution, risk aversion on the part of those smaller pools. If you can make them bigger pools, deeper pools, that increases incentives to invest locally and invest in risky businesses that are the Nvidias of tomorrow. So that having that as an engine of British pension funds as the engine of British companies is the trick the government's now trying to pull off.
And this pensions bill, therefore, is something that you would back, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, the question really is whether it's expeditious and muscular enough in scrumming together those myriad pension funds and providing the right incentives for them to invest at scale in British business. How odd is it that Canadian and Australian and Dutch pension funds invest more in British businesses than British pension funds do?
Answer, very, very odd indeed. We've talked wonderfully, frankly, across the economy. Let me ask you a little bit finally about the politics of all of this, because you were quoted this week saying that you thought the by far the most successful tribune of the people, tribune of working class British people, was Nigel Farage. Because what he was saying, I mean, he's been talking a lot. He's been talking today, but he's been talking an awful lot about reopening coal mines and reopening this, reopening that, in a very effective way. But we have a cabinet which is overwhelmingly comprehensive, state school educated, many of whose leading members started their lives in council houses or in families on benefits. How can it be that this cabinet is unable to speak for the working class in a way that Nigel Farage, who's after all comes from an affluent southern family, is able to do?
Now there's a question, Andrew, to which I do not have a good answer. Some politicians, whatever their background, have that sixth sense, have the intuition about what will work with an audience. I think Farage definitely has that. I think when it comes to our, you mentioned the government, the cabinet, the more time spent outside of the hallowed halls of Westminster, the better, for understanding the mood of the nation. I think the best thing I used to do when I was at the Bank of England, I spent half my time travelling around the UK, speaking to people, gathering their stories about why the economy is working or not working for them. And more of that.
To be fair to the Prime Minister, that is one thing he does tend to do. He gets out of Westminster quite a lot and goes around and listens to people.
Yes. Well, there's an important distinction between hearing and listening. And I think having the agenda set by those you are visiting is crucial. They are there, you are there to listen, not to speak, 2 ears and all that. I think a bit more of that would allow the current crop to tune in somewhat better to the key issue. Take austerity, right?
Yeah.
Politicians this week will be queuing up to say, this is not austerity. You ask the public, more than half think we are already in austerity. The level of public services has not recovered across many dimensions from 2010. It feels like austerity, and unless politicians recognise that, they will go wrong.
And it's going to be a long haul. Final question, Andy. You've been very generous with your time. Final question. You've been associated with all sorts of things, and I'm going to ask you a kind of biggest regrets question around the whole issue of levelling up, which is the Conservatives' attempt to do for the North and Midlands of England what Labour are now trying to do. And the ideas were very good, but the money was never there.
Well, and therein, I think, would be my regret, Andrew. So levelling up, whatever you call it, is the only route by which this government will achieve its growth objective. It really is that arithmetically simple. So
think of Manchester, think of Birmingham, think of Liverpool and Leeds.
Think all 4 points of the UK compass. We need them all pointing due north. If the government is to have any hope of meeting its growth and living standards objective. And to do that, they will need, one, a much more full-throated, wholehearted approach to devolution. It's pretty mealy-mouthed right now. In fact, I would say along some dimensions, they are not even a believer in full-fat devolution. And secondly, backing those powers with monies at the requisite scale. I've been around the policy houses, as of course have you, Andrew, for many decades. We do not lack for policy initiatives in this country, Andrew. What we lack is the capacity to pursue them at the requisite scale to move the dial. It would be my regret from the Levelling Up White Paper that those initiatives were not pursued at scale. The self-same concern, question mark, exists about this government too.
I can hear a very, very slight sort of susurration outside this studio of applause and delight in that, and it's Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham and many more who would be applauding that. But for now, Andy Haldane, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
A man who knows what he's talking about. Now, our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, is here with me in the studio to give her reaction to what Andy Haldane had to say. Aggie, before we come on to that, however, let's just talk about what's going to happen this week, because as I said before, it's a really big week, and we're expecting major investment announcements. Who's going to be the big, where are the big stories going to be? Who are going to be the big winners?
That's right. So I think we expect that one of the big winners to be the NHS, expect them to get £30 billion. We also expect, as the story was into today, AI to be a big winner, £1 billion for them. Nuclear power too, as you talked about in your introduction. And I think there could be other winners, transport, for example, as Rachel Reeves announced last week. But I think there could be losers too.
There will certainly be losers, and there'll be certainly a lot of argument about it all. Now, Andy Haldane there, very, very careful in his use of words, but he clearly thinks that Rachel Reeves could, in fact, find ways to borrow more if she had to. And I just wonder what the mood on the Labour backbenches, you've been talking to Labour MPs all day, what they feel looking ahead to this really, really important week, and above all, what they feel about the U-turn on the winter fuel allowance, which, as I said at the beginning, is a big one.
It is a big one. I think there is a mixed reaction to the U-turn. I think it's fair to say there is genuine delight from lots of Labour MPs who just think this has dragged on and on and on, and finally we made a mistake last year, finally we're owning up to it and U-turning, and it's embarrassing to U-turn. We both know it's embarrassing to U-turn, but then after today it's done, at least until the budget when we actually find out how on earth they're going to pay for it. But there are other Labour MPs who are concerned about that aspect of it, how it's going to be paid for, and whether or not the threshold might actually be too high as well. One Labour MP said to me, why is it that working age people can be beaten down with taxes, but as soon as you become a pensioner, you're not allowed to be touched? So there is that concern too. But in terms of what Labour MPs and indeed people in government are worried about this Wednesday, I think there is a concern about how deep those cuts could be, and also that conversation that we have all the time about that narrative. And I think there are people in government who worry, even if they slash the cash, as they will in some departments, whether or not they get enough credit for that as well.
Because wherever they spend this is capital spending we're talking about, and then there's the day-to-day spending, and we've got lots and lots of possible industrial action again across the public sector. We've got lots of departments which, as you say, will be losers, including local government and housing, we think, and others. So this is something that's going to go on. Do you think Rachel Reeves can sort of regain her credibility, regain her popularity inside the Labour Party? Because she has taken one heck of a battering.
Yeah, she has. And I thought it was really interesting listening to Andy Haldane there, who almost whisper it sounded optimistic about the economy. You don't hear that very much, do you? And I think that is what it entirely rests upon for Rachel Reeves. Growth, the economy improving, and they've tried to start talking up the economy rather than talking down, as they did for the first, I think, fair to say, 11 months of their premiership. And I think it just entirely rests on that, really, and rests on departments not briefing out too angrily about her after Wednesday.
The times they are changing, or at least let's hope so. Aggie Chambre, thank you very much indeed. Up next, we're going to speak to someone on the ground in LA as the political rift between the president and California governor around those huge riots intensifies. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr. The time now 6:20.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Just accept we need stop and search.
Straight to the point.
This is a shocking night.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
When was the last time your party was in touch with the electorate?
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Summer.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:22. Los Angeles is burning again. But this time, it isn't wildfires, it's cars, as riots erupt over Donald Trump's determination to detain and deport millions of illegal immigrants. The president has sent in 2,000 National Guard troops and placed 500 Marines on standby. And he's now in a brutally aggressive and personal confrontation with the Democratic governor of California and possible next presidential candidate, Gavin Newsom. He calls him Gavin Newscum, about whether Trump was too quick to call in the troops. Here's the governor responding to threats from Trump's border czar that they could arrest him for immigration interference.
Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting. So, Tom, arrest me. Let's go.
Well, this is a dangerous moment for America. Let's hope the trouble doesn't spread from LA to other parts of the country. But it's not entirely surprising, given how many illegal immigrants the president wanted to pick up. He's talked of deporting 2 to 3 million people immediately and 15 to 20 million overall. Now, those are numbers so big, it was always hard to see how it could be achieved without major urban disruption. This is not just a story for them, it's about us as well, because earlier today, Zia Yusuf, the Reform UK chairman who briefly resigned last week and then returned again, promised that his party would deport every illegal immigrant in Britain. That is roughly 1.2 million people. Could this actually be done? Would it involve widespread unrest? And what would happen to the economy as a result? All very much questions for today. But first, let's get the latest from Los Angeles with the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Los Angeles Times, Michael Hiltzik, author of The Golden State, A History of California. Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's not looking quite as golden as usual. It's very hard for people watching from abroad. You see these little clips on social media of cars burning and troops and so forth to gauge how widespread, how serious this disturbance actually is. So fill us in.
Well, it's not very widespread. It's not nearly as serious as the pictures might suggest. It's certainly not as serious as Trump and his minions are suggesting. These were protests that took place in an isolated part of downtown. They took place essentially during a weekend. There were clashes with law enforcement authorities, nothing that the local law enforcement authorities couldn't handle by themselves. And I think it's become clear that Trump's deployment of the National Guard, which is sort of a state militia, was an overreaction and really performative and complicated the situation beyond what local authorities really thought was necessary.
And Gavin Newsom, the governor, as well as the mayor of LA, both seemed to think that this was an entirely deliberate piece of political theatre, kind of whipped up by Donald Trump. This has become a very, very personal feud between the three of them, hasn't it?
Well, yes, and it clearly was a sort of performance art by Trump. It wasn't necessary. The potential for further conflict and more serious conflicts is there because you have now this sort of paramilitary militia force in place. These are mostly young men who have not been trained in sort of urban combat, so anything could happen. There are really only, at this point, only about 200 or 300 of the National Guardsmen in place. The talk of 2,000, that hasn't happened yet. The talk of mobilizing the military, that would be an enormous step and one that would be highly controversial, probably illegal, possibly unconstitutional. So I think Trump would probably be well advised to step back from that. But yes, he's in conflict with our governor, the Democratic governor, who sees himself as a candidate for the presidency in 2028. But the governor has been very firm, and I think correct, in saying that this was a provocation to deploy these troops. It was entirely unnecessary, and it was really just Trump trying to show off.
Michael, let me ask you about Trump's promise to deport up to 20 million illegal people, illegal migrants. Right around the pace at the moment, we're seeing Trump promises hitting reality and going no further. He hasn't invaded Greenland. He hasn't been able to take over Canada. A lot of his tariffs have been removed after negotiation. And even the big, beautiful bill is in trouble in the Senate. Is this an example where what he said about the number of people he was going to deport proves to be absolutely ridiculous hyperbole?
It's ridiculous. It's impossible. The disruption that it would cause in our economy and our society is incalculable. And when we look at his talk about this, as well as his talk about taking over Greenland and Canada and what have you, I counsel my readers to sort of step away from all of these claims that on a gonna happen scale are not. We're not going to annex Greenland. We're not going to annex Canada. We are not going to deport 15 or 20 million immigrants. That's just not going to happen. But it's sort of Trump playing the role of provocateur in chief. And so far, it's not going over very well with the general public. His popularity is diminishing by the day. And at this point, he reacts to that by sort of stepping up the rhetoric and stepping up the violent rhetoric, really. Yeah. And it's not going to help him. It's certainly not going to make America safer or more secure.
Common sense and perspective. Michael Hiltzik, thank you very much indeed. And now to answer some of the questions around mass deportations and just how feasible they would be here, I'm joined by the immigration and human rights lawyer, Harjap Singh Bhangal. Harjap, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Now, you know, as in America here, when Reform says we're going to try and remove 1.2 million illegal migrants from Britain, it may well be rhetoric, it may well be hyperbole. Would it be possible?
Not really. If you look at our infrastructure, the UK doesn't have a system to hold that much deportation or to deport that many people. We only have 2,200 detention places. So you'd have to times that by over 500 in order to hold 1.2 million people. Secondly, the cost of deporting someone, on average, according to the Home Office, is £12,000 per person. We haven't got that much money. We've just about got money to give pensioners the winter fuel back. So it's not physically possible. We don't know how many people are here illegally, and we don't have a register of that because we don't have exit controls at the moment. So it's physically not possible. There would be protest against it. But despite all of that, Reform have the liberty of saying what they want and not having to actually do it at the moment because they're not in government. So
at the moment. So, I mean, what happened in downtown LA was clearly that ICE had gone into some communities and looking at the flags, particularly Mexican communities, and people had come out in support of those likely to be deported, and it got very, very angry very quickly. Do you think the same thing would happen here?
Well, it's happened here. It happened in Scotland, if you remember, when immigration went in a bit heavy-handed to arrest somebody from a restaurant. And the van got surrounded by British people, by not an immigrant community, but by British people who were just in sort of disgust at the behaviour of immigration, at the way that it had been handled, the whole matter, and immigration had to back down on the matter. And so it does happen when you go into community areas and try to disrupt not only businesses, but people who have made relationships with local community members, people, working in shops or working in what we call the black economy, and that way, this, you can't just go in and say, right, heavy-handed, we're going to send everybody back, or we're going to round everyone up. And when it's been tried here heavy-handedly, there has been resistance.
That figure of 1.2 million people being here illegally will seem to a lot of people absolutely enormous. Is it accurate?
I think it's a bit downplayed. For my estimate, I think it's about 1.5 million, because that figure does not include people who just come here and overstay and never get caught again. We don't have a record of them going back.
And some people listening will be saying there must be something we can do. Is there?
Yeah, there is. Right, what we need to discuss in a civilised manner is that we're not going to be able to send these people back. Do we leave them in the black economy to be exploited, not paying tax? Or do we finally learn how to make money out of immigration, as opposed to chasing our tail and spending it on hotels, vans, immigration officers, detention centres? We should have a scheme where people can earn a right to stay here, not call their family members over, not claim benefits, not call their spouses, and never get permanent. Just like Dubai, where every year you have to renew your visa as long as you earn over a certain amount and contribute and don't commit any crimes. If somebody wants to come here and work and they want to come into the system, that way we'll also know exactly how many people are here, because it'll be a voluntary process.
All right. Harjap Singh, Bhangal. Very, very interesting. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to me. Now, you may need to get used to hearing the phrase summer of discontent a lot more in the months ahead, with nurses voting on strike action today and doctors considering the same. We're going to talk about that next. But first, time now 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
More than 3/4 of pensioners will now qualify for winter fuel payments after a government U-turn. Further details have been revealed on plans for this year, which will see anyone with an income under $35,000 receive the allowance. An NHS trust has been found guilty of a health and safety offence but cleared of corporate manslaughter after a young woman took her own life. The Old Bailey heard 22-year-old Alice Figueiredo has previously self-harmed at Goodmayes Hospital in East London. And the author of The Day of the Jackal, Frederick Forsyth, has died at the age of 86 following a brief illness. The best-selling author passed away surrounded by his family at home this morning. LBC weather, rain becoming confined to central, northern England and Wales tonight, becoming drier in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. It's a big day on the industrial front, with nearly 350,000 nursing staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland being asked to vote from today on a 3.6% pay increase, which the Royal College of Nursing has already dismissed as grotesque. The government says nurses will earn more than £30,000 starting pay for the first time ever. But this is a huge moment, both for the NHS and the RCN itself. In a moment, we're going to hear from one of the RCN's chief executives. But first, our political editor, Natasha Clark, had an exclusive conversation with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, about strikes. And she's here to tell us more. Natasha, welcome to the studio. I would have thought, given what's going to be announced later this week, Wes Streeting would be a pretty happy man.
Well, he's a happy man about this, Andrew, about the spending review and the settlement he's getting from the Chancellor, but on strike action, not very happy at all. Another huge row is brewing for the government over pay deals. Last year, we, of course, saw the government take quite a lot of political flack for that 28% pay rise that they gave to doctors. And this year, they are getting 5.4%, and they are angry that that is not as much as they expected. They are threatening to strike once more. However, the Health Secretary is standing absolutely firm. It is a big no from him. There is no room for negotiation there. Wes Streeting told me earlier today that he had handed them a big pay rise already.
Strikes are the last thing the NHS need right now. I think it's the last thing the resident doctors themselves need, certainly the last thing that patients need. If I had my fingers in my ears and I was saying, get stuffed on pay, and I don't agree with you about the conditions you're working in, and I'm not interested, I'm never going to speak to you, I'd sort of understand strike action. But you've got in me and in this government a health secretary who in just 10 months has given you a 28.9% average pay rise.
And if he's sounding pretty bullish there, Natasha, is that partly because he thinks public opinion is starting to come over to his side?
Yes, absolutely right, Andrew. There was some YouGov polling out on this just a couple of weeks ago, which suggested that the number of people that support the junior doctors, or the resident doctors as they're now known, going on strike again is down quite a lot from where it was last summer, where about more than half the public supported it. Now it's down to around 30% or so. So they feel, the government feel, that now the support is not with people to strike yet again. However, the BMA absolutely standing firm on this. Earlier today, LBC spoke to the co-chair of the BMA, Dr. Ross Nevote. He told LBC that this was only the start of pay negotiations.
I'd ask him to look in the mirror, because right now, more than 50,000 doctors are working in a system that's bleeding talent, burning people out. We took a partial deal last year in good faith because we were told it was the start of pay restoration, not the end. And what we're seeing now is a government that's trying to walk away from that promise. And you can't fix the NHS with empty promises and empty pockets. We are still waiting for the Health Secretary to sit down and negotiate with us on pay.
Now, I put that to the Department of Health earlier today. They say that Wes Streeting has offered to meet the BMA multiple times. They also said to me that it was not part of the deal, that this was the first step towards pay restoration. But that is exactly what the BMA are saying today. They feel that this was the first step towards eradicating a huge chunk of their pay since 2008. So I think this is going to be another huge row for the government that's eventually going to blow up. And of course, nurses, like you say, and you're about to speak to their union, they're getting even less. They were furious when they saw what the doctors were getting. They're also considering whether to look at industrial action. This is not going away for the government.
We did use the phrase summer of discontent. Natasha Clark, thank you very much indeed. And as you were listening to that, was the director of the Royal College of Nursing in England, Patricia Marquis. Now, you've described the government's offer as grotesque. Does that mean that if you win your way in the ballot, you are indeed looking at industrial action ahead?
Look, our members will decide. It's up to our members to take a view on this initial point, first of all. We see industrial action as a last resort. It's a failure of the system to address the problems that nursing have got. But what we want to do is to hear from our members about the award that they're being given. And if there is a strong message back from almost 350,000 members telling the government this isn't enough, what we would say is please listen, please come and talk to us. We need to address this and we need to address it urgently. Nursing is in a crisis. fewer people are coming in, more people are leaving, and pay is part of the issue. But it's not just about the percentage increase. What we're wanting to do is discuss the structural changes that need to happen to enable our members to be paid properly for what they do. So it's not just about the percentage annual award, it's about a clear path to progression as well.
Is that basically because once you've qualified as a nurse, you don't really then see your pay going up year by year? There isn't, as it were, as you say, a professional progression, and that's what you want?
Yes. For nurses, we can see that they are what we've been describing as weighted to the bottom of the NHS pay scales. More nurses stay in that bottom band. So you can register as a nurse and work for over 40 years and still be in the same grade. It doesn't work. And we need those urgent conversations, both to increase the cost of living award, but crucially and fundamentally to address the problem of the salaries and the clear path to progression, which is what we need to see.
Do you have an instinct, I'm sorry to put it like this, about whether we are heading for more strikes from nurses or not?
I'll be perfectly honest and say, no, I don't have an instinct. What I do have an instinct is that I suspect most of our members will say this isn't enough. We have seen some positive moves from this government to address the problems of the NHS, and we see that as positive. What we need them to start doing is giving clear signals that there is a pathway to the solutions for nursing, and that they really do mean that they're going to put their money where their mouth is, because they will not be able to solve the problems of the NHS unless they take nursing with them, and they have plenty of them to do it. Which at the minute is looking increasingly difficult, with fewer coming in, as I say, and more leaving.
Patricia, Marquis of the RCN, thank you very much for talking to LBC. Now then, the plight of huge numbers of Palestinians trapped in Gaza without enough food or water or medical supplies is an intensely serious matter. Helping them by sea is a possibility that's been discussed by aid organisations around the world. But the arrival of a single yacht with the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg and others on board, then boarded and peacefully taken by the Israelis to the port of Ashdod, has been widely described in the media as an Instagram generation stunt and the ultimate expression of selfie politics. It certainly hasn't had any direct effect on Gaza or directly helped anyone there. Has it changed a single mind anywhere in the world? Let's hear now from Huwaida Arraf, Palestinian American human rights attorney and Freedom Flotilla organiser. Huwaida, thank you very much indeed for joining me. What do you say to those who say it's a very, very serious situation, it's something that the whole world is focused on, but this is just a stunt?
It is absolutely a very serious situation. And what we have is countries around the world that could be doing something and that have a legal responsibility to be doing something are not doing anything. And even worse, governments like the United Kingdom actively complicit in Israel's genocide and systematic deliberate starvation of an entire civilian population. It is horrific. And the fact that we had to have 12 civilians at sea, carrying what humanitarian aid they could, directly confronting the Israeli military, and now illegally abducted by Israel, is a result of the inaction and or complicity of the entire world government.
Yeah, well, compared with what's needed, as we both know, it's a tiny, tiny amount of aid they were bringing. And you must have expected the Israelis to intervene. If they hadn't, what was the plan? Were you going to land in Gaza? And presumably then it'd be hard to get back out of Gaza. What was the plan for afterwards?
Look, it shouldn't be hard to get in and out of Gaza. Israel has absolutely no legal authority. But that is illegal, and that is the problem. Why are we allowing Israel to continue to do what it's doing when it's blatantly unlawful? There is no serious human rights organization or human rights attorney who will tell you that Israel's actions in Gaza and this blockade that is directly harming and it is intended to harm an entire civilian population. It is starving 1 million children and babies are dying before the eyes of the world because they don't have food, that is waiting at a border, and Israel's blocking it from getting in. That is unlawful. And so no government in the world, no country in the world has a right to intercept in order to maintain an unlawful blockade. And that is exactly what Israel did. It forcefully intercepted a ship that was a sailboat that was sailing peacefully in line with international law, carrying what humanitarian aid it could. You know what was on that boat, sir? You know what was on that boat? Baby formula.
Tampons
baby
and food.
Formula. And baby milk.
Yeah.
And Israel says that is a security threat, and it had to launch an attack on it.
Let me just come back to my original question, though. What was the plan? Was the boat going to anchor or dock off Gaza and take that on into Gaza? Was that the plan? And did you have somebody you were going to meet there? How is it going to be organised?
Yes, it was planning to sail into the port of Gaza City, which we know has been bombed and destroyed, but we have been in touch with Palestinian civil society, and they wholeheartedly welcomed us. And we were going to meet the people and distribute the meager aid that we had, which would have helped some families for sure, and sail back out and encourage more people to follow us, because we need a worldwide movement to act to break the siege. It's not only about getting in humanitarian aid. Palestinians need it absolutely, because they are being deliberately starved, but we need to break Israel's illegal siege. Israel has turned Gaza into a death camp, and the entire world has to act to break this siege.
An MP said in the Commons in the last few days that one of the people supporting your Freedom Flotilla and one of the backers of it was in fact a Hamas member in London. Is that true?
I don't know what you're talking about. There are always these kinds of smears. We are not affiliated with any political organization. We are a civil society organization that acts for human rights. But of course, there are people out there who always are looking to justify Israel's actions, and they throw out these smears with absolutely no basis.
All right. Huwaida Arraf, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. Now then, coming up, stories crop up all the time about people tackling instances of lawlessness themselves when strained public services are just too busy or underfunded to step in. Well, there is a new group now targeting graffiti on London tubes, and we're going to hear from one of them in just a few minutes, but the time now, 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
So now we know the government has confirmed its U-turn on the winter fuel allowance. Is this a sign of strength by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, or a sign of weakness?
Ian Dale on LBC.
Apply.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:49. Now, I don't know if you've seen the little films on social media of a group of volunteers wearing high-vis jackets scrubbing graffiti off the Bakerloo tube trains in London. It's a bit inspiring, and it reminds us of the old truth that if we tolerate small quantities of lawlessness, then lawlessness will spread. Mend the broken window, and you'll start to mend the street and the society. The group involved in this are young so-called techno-optimists, and they run a campaign called Looking for Growth. It's time, I think, that we find out more. So let's talk now to Joe Reeve, fresh from turning filthy trains into good-looking ones. Well, congratulations on that, first of all, Joe. Why do you think that Transport for London are unable to clear up the graffiti on these trains?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I think there are lots of reasons. It's a complicated issue, and it's not the kind of thing that there's just one fix. There are so many different reasons that it's hard to clean. Actually, we found that for most of the graffiti, it's very easy to clean. The reason it gets hard to clean any one piece of graffiti is when you leave it for a long time. And so actually we've...
So the older the graffiti, the harder it is to remove?
Yeah, you leave it on for a week or something and it takes 20 minutes, whereas if you wipe it off within a day, it takes 2 minutes. So it's sort of 10 times harder every week that you leave it.
Where did the idea come from?
Well, we first were clearing graffiti about 2 weeks ago in Old Street. So we went and painted over a bunch of graffiti on the walls, and that was a great success. We had a lot
So where did that come from? Because, we all pass graffiti every day, and you might think that looks horrible, that looks unpleasant or whatever, but very few of us actually do anything about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those things where I've been feeling, and a lot of people that I know, people in this organisation I'm working with, there are thousands of us, young people mostly, but not everybody's young, and we're all sort of feeling frustrated and seeing things go around us decaying and looking worse and worse and worse over time. And a lot of people that maybe would do something are choosing, well, I'll just move country. I'll go to the US, I'll go to Australia where the weather's nicer, there's more money, I don't need to work so many hours, whatever. But we're all sort of very ambitious, but also very patriotic. We love Britain, we love London, and we want to see it better. So...
Well, I've seen, the film you make about growth on the video, and it's very inspiring. You've got lots of great British figures and icons and so on in it, but you also talk about a kind of insurgency against the government or something like that in it. And I just wonder what's the politics behind this? Let's be very frank. Is this sort of funded by right-wing groups with a right-wing agenda? Is it a kind of Dominic Cummings, Elon Musk kind of organisation, or what?
So we founded last year, at the end of last year, and it was Lawrence and myself. We started in his living room, and we said, we're really worried about this budget that's coming up, the Rachel Reeves budget, which ended up being a bit of a disaster. And we said, well, we've got to do something, otherwise we just got to leave the country. Either do something or leave. And so we said, we're going to stay and we're going to do something about it. And the sort of response we got immediately, we had Dominic Cummings messaging us and sharing it, saying, this is great, we should do this. We had Zia Youssef, chairman of Reform Party.
Yeah. So that's why I say,
but then we also had
a right-wing sort of agenda.
But then we also had the Labour Growth Group, the largest group of MPs in Parliament, support us. And they've been some of our biggest supporters.
Yeah,
we work very closely with them.
And indeed, a lot of what you ask for on the film, like radical reform of the planning system, a new generation of nuclear power, this government is now moving towards.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the sort of... We contributed some things to the current sort of government's trajectory. We drafted a bill and shared that with the government, and it was in the Times, it was in, left-wing newspapers, it was in right-wing newspapers. This is not a partisan issue. This is a sort of global issue that everybody in the country, in politics and on the ground, is feeling.
You're doing some very, very professional-looking stuff. Are you funded by any particular person?
So initially, Lawrence and I self-funded. So we both put in a few £1,000s to pay for the lawyer to get the bill drafted. Since then, we've had so many people come forwards, donate money themselves. We've got membership, we've got merch.
So this is crowdfunding rather than one big sugar daddy, as it were.
Yeah, we have some people that come to us and say, I'd like to donate more. Is there a way I can do that efficiently without going through using my bank card? But yeah.
All right, last question. What is a techno-optimist? I mean, I love the word, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, I think... So I'm very optimistic as a person. I'm very excited and I want the world to be better, and I think it will be. There are lots of people that maybe, and quite understandably, think that technology isn't a force for good. But I think technology is actually a really good way for us to make humans better and the human experience better.
You're a coder, you're a geek deep down.
I am, that's why I'm here in a hoodie. I'm a software engineer by background, yeah.
All right, Joe, thank you very, very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. Really appreciate it, really interesting. Now then, we still do have important national hobbies. One is that we hate the water companies, Thames Water in particular, and there's been a lot of talk about nationalising it, perhaps nationalising all of them as this slow-motion crisis goes on. But isn't that just too expensive? That is what politicians say, but one think tank, Commonwealth, beg to differ. Ewan McGaughey, Professor of Law at King's College London, wrote the report today exploring this very issue. Ewan, first of all, if I have mangled your surname, my apologies. But much more important than that, you think that it wouldn't actually cost the government very much, or indeed anything at all, possibly, to nationalise the water companies. Can you explain in as simple terms as you can why that might be so?
Yes, great to be with you. So the government is relying on a figure from water company lobbyists. They wrote a report in 2018 funded by Anglia Water, Southwest, Severn Trent, United Utilities, saying that water would cost about 90 billion to nationalise. But when you look at what the law says, and that's my field, you see that if you take a water company into public ownership, you only have to pay appropriate value. And that comes down to some case law from the European Court of Human Rights that says a fair balance has to be struck in the public interest if you're taking over assets to provide essential services. And with the water companies, appropriate value is probably much less than market value.
Is that because of their debt? Is that because of their debt? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, just to give Thames Water as an example, the government is repeating figures that they'd need to pay 19.6 billion to take over Thames Water. This is actually a figure that starts with the market value at privatisation in 1990, adds in capital expenditure and multiplies by the retail price index every year since then. Actual market value of Thames Water is probably something more like 4 billion, given the latest bids to take over Thames Water from this private equity group in America called KKR. But actually the cost in law will probably be about zero because so much money has been taken out by shareholders, 10 billion since privatisation, 13 billion taken outside by banks, and 23 billion needed in repairs. So striking that fair balance means that, the water companies wouldn't cost anything to take over.
And of course, some historical precedent, but there was also a cynical thing that the government can do. Simply piling on more regulation drives the price down, and then you can take it in, as you say, for almost nothing at all. But once it was in public hands, there are still vast investment and clean-up problems ahead. The reason this is such a big public issue is, frankly, the filthy quality of so many of our rivers and our beaches, and the failure of companies like Thames Water over the years to do enough about it. So taking it over, even if they could take it over for almost nothing, would anything really change?
Look, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, because ultimately it's payers that pay for all infrastructure, and companies are paying so much in dividends and interest on debts that it's around a third of our bills going into dividends and debt instead of into infrastructure investment. So, if you take that 23 billion that Thames Water needs, our bills are going up by around 36% nationwide or England-wide. And putting companies into public ownership would mean that all that bill payer money can be put into the repairs that are needed instead
OK, well, listen, Professor McGaughey, I very much hope that Keir Starmer is sitting at home, scratching his chin and listening to this conversation and goes and reflects on it overnight. Thank you very much indeed for that. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has finally reached a deal with all of the cabinet ministers vying for more money ahead of her spending review on Wednesday. But with the difficult economic cards the Chancellor has been dealt, is there any hope for positive headlines once the review is actually unveiled? I spoke to the former chief economist at the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, to find out.
Like austerity, right? Politicians this week will be queuing up to say this is not austerity. You ask the public, more than half think we are already in austerity. The level of public services has not recovered across many dimensions from 2010. It feels like austerity, and unless politicians recognise that, they will go wrong.
clever man, Andy Haldane. I, however, will be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. So now we know the government has confirmed its U-turn on the winter fuel allowance. The barrier for receiving it has been tripled from 11,500 to 35,000. Now, when the initial decision was made, it would have saved the government 1.5 billion. The cost of the U-turn is 1.25 billion.